Alrighty, I should be streaming. And in a moment, I'll whip out the old chat window. Kind of like this. Ta-da! Up needs to be resized. Good enough. And it should be hearable. And I'll fire up GitHub so that I can, oh, wrong button. Push the button, Frank. And I've even gonna set up music playback. In case I need it. I'm clicking all the things. I'm clicking all the wrong things. It's fine. You got to be careful because I can crash stuff pretty good with certain of these programs open. Like if I have Twisted Wave and Cog open, I think they fight over who gets exclusive access to audio, and that just crashes everything completely. But hey, hi Robert, how's it going? So I am here. I have not begun to taste my coffee this morning, or this section of the morning. I actually get up super early, but then I grab a nap before doing my streaming. So how that basically works is here I am, ready to do the streaming, ready to answer questions or think of stuff on stream and show people, or I suppose draw pictures of kitties or something. And if all goes well, I've grabbed a little bit of sleep as well. And I'm good for a couple of hours, which is good because if things go really well with the Patreon, let's see, how can we... If things go really well with the Patreon, I could be doing this for 3 hours, so I'll really need to be all set as far as that's concerned. But yeah, we are here for the Monday question answering stream. And I probably should be trying to guzzle my coffee, because otherwise my brain will just freeze up and I won't be able to carry off the YouTube streamer running pattern, the YouTube streamer running pattern that one has to do. It's interesting because YouTube streamers, and especially Twitch streamers, get up to all this interesting stuff. Like, I'm a big fan of the internet comedy troupe Loading Ready Run, and I think they have they're established on Twitch pretty well. So one of the things they do is at the end of many of their streams, they shout out people who have subscribed since they streamed last, and they'll just go through like reading off all these really strange internet names for sometimes 10-15 minutes, with certain ones, like really enormous, long time variety shows that they do, by the time they're done, they're spending half an hour talking through all this stuff. But I get it, because it's like recognition and acknowledgement of people. I've never really been sure where I fit regarding that kind of stuff, because basically I do the plugins and people kind of want me working on stuff, and also resting, apparently. I think in the modern internet age, although this is not sustainable or good, you know that you're doing properly if your own customers and supporters like, for the love of God, man, take a rest. And that's roughly the right amount to sort of be growing and succeeding in some kind of way. Failing that, apparently you're not bringing in new people or something. But the thing about the subscribing thing is I've also done stuff like offered to list people in there's a section on my website where if you're supporting the Patreon to certain amounts, and it's multiples of how many plugins you would have bought a year if they were being sold at $50 a pop, and then you're not allowed to have them any other way. And there's a spot on the masthead of the website that credits people, or at least lets them put a link in somewhere. And yeah, Loading Ready Run is in fact the place where I found out about the warping of people's voices. I don't think I can show that to you right now, but I will do a little quick search. I'm pretty good at web searching, except for I just did it wrong. However, that did tell me what the thing was. So what you want is voice, well, no, actually not. I searched for the wrong thing. Instead, I'm finding stuff that does robot voices or stuff. Well, what I'm looking for is a particular scenario where people are doing a thing involving listening to their voice with a bunch of latency. And if you throw on like a quarter to a third second of latency, it can render you completely impossible of speaking. It's really disconcerting. So right now I'm not finding that, so I'm not going to make it a giant quest for searching that stuff down. But point being, that is something. No, I was trying to do a web search for it, and not only was I not able to find the program, which may or may not still be accessible, it was a cell phone app, and a bunch of the Lure folks have iPhones, so it would be at least iPhone, possibly iPhone and Android, and who knows what else. But I'm not sure whether it's still available, because I'm not sure whether it got taken down. I'll do a little bit more research. I'll search for voice changer app banned from web store to see whether... No. I'll try voice delay app banned from web store. Okay, I found the thing. I did find the thing. I don't think it's actually getting banned, though. I think it's just... here, we've got a Google Play version. It's delayed auditory feedback, so like as little as 150 milliseconds could totally wreck you. And the Google app version seems to have ads, which is terrible. And it doesn't work for everybody. But look for this, Speech Jammer. Because that's what it does, is it jams your speech. And for some people, this is incredibly disruptive. And it's usually the people who have the best voices for performing, like the most ability to act. Or at least that's what I was observing, because none of the Loading Ready Run people are bad. They're all good. But there's a couple few of them that are unusually good. And Graham, who's one of the heads, the leaders of Loading Ready Run, had impossible, insuperable difficulties to the point where it made him feel sick and he had to go and sit down. And he is an exceptionally good voice actor. And then also Alex Stacey, who's a friend of mine, or at least, boy, that's really parasocial of me. Alex is a favorite of mine. I would love it if he was a friend of mine, but that's not a thing. No, instead he is a performer and scriptwriter and voice actor and takes on various roles and is also quite a gifted artist. Like this thing that I'm doing with the drawing stuff using the brush pen and stuff, he would find that very easy to approach because he is an artist in pen and ink and likes the natural media, which is another thing we've got in common. At any rate, Alex has done a character that actually dresses in this kind of monk robe. They've got costume monk robes available at Lur. And what he does is he is the grape keeper. Not the gatekeeper, the grape keeper. And mostly what he does is tell people to get into the sea. It's like, no, in fact, get into the sea. So he attempted to do Grapekeeper while wearing and hearing the Speech Jammer. You could say two things. One, it did not go well. Or two, oh, it went so wonderfully well. Graham has great difficulty speaking with this thing on. But Alex's voice turned really crazy and strange. And it basically just has to be heard. I'm going to do a little quick Google search, and I don't know whether... Like if I put the speakers to multi-output device, I think it might blast the heck out of my voice. And if I had... I'm going to do... I might get into a sort of feedback zone, but I keep trying new things with the audio and visuals and stuff of this. Why it came up in my Google search. The Grapekeeper is speech jammed and tries to send chat to the sea. I'm going to see whether I can play a little bit of this and have it come out.
I feel like Alex is going to do something. It's now 69, 69, 69, for you. 69. It can happen.
Do you hear anything in the background?
This was actually edited.
I've got it kind of quiet. If he starts talking, I'll turn it up a little bit so people can hear it. It's going to be loud.
I'm turning it on. Ship. It is not on. The word is ship.
Aha, I have audio capture. It's making a sound. I do believe this is going to make a sound.
Vitality, be the man you used to be. Try a sample today.
There's an ad in his app.
Yep. There's an ad in Beej's app.
So that's what it sounds like.
I'm wearing my reading glasses because I need to read the chat because some of you are going to go into the sea.
He's trying to say these things normally.
Like you, eternal density. Get in the sea. And you, Jim Rabbit, you need to also get into the sea.
So basically, that's the kind of nonsense you get up to. I'm not going to keep it going. But it is very silly. And hopefully some of that came through. If it did, it was a new experiment of playing something else on my stream and being able to play it through. So that is Speech Jammer. And that is not the most extreme version of Speech Jammer, but what Alex gets when he has that latency in over-ear headphones and can't hear his voice, instead he's hearing a delay, is he gets this like buffer smash thing. Like there are plenty of people, and Graham is one of them, where their pitch goes bonkers. They're like trying to say a thing and their voice, and it sounds like they're having a wow. It sounds like they're having a mutated delay with pitch shift going on. But Alex gets buffer smashed. Like syllables will sputter and repeat and stuff. And it's very strange. But the interesting thing about it is how that speaks to how people's voices react to latency and their audio feedback and what they can hear as they perform. Like that's a little example of the nightmares that can befall you if you're trying to do lead vocal tracks or something and you've got too much latency in your headphones. It's in that direction. Somebody was saying about Voice Trick, which is what I put out on Sunday, that rather than a plugin to fix vocal performances, it's a plugin to not ruin vocal performances in the first place. And there's a lot to that, and that's also the direction that I like to take a lot of the time. I would much prefer to do stuff that helps you get things right first, or teach people ways to get things right first, rather than focus on, like, here's a plugin that I promise is going to make things perfect afterwards. I'm going to take a quick peek back at OBS just to make sure that, and it does look like my mic is still functioning. I was switching controls and things around, so I'm never really quite sure of what I'm going to get. I think that probably worked, though, because they patched stuff through to that output, the multi-output device. And that's the thing where I can hear it in the headphones, but it's also going to the stream. I'm also looking at other stuff on my desk. As usual, I have lots of stuff piled up on my desk. For instance, here is a thing that I made, which is a little leather scrap. And this is for the purpose of taking my Xiaomi Yi camera, which is kind of sitting over there being charged. And actually, yeah, check this out. If any of you guys are still there, you probably are. I can show you a variety of things that I've got in the works, and basically stuff that I do. Because honestly, with this live streaming, it's so weird for me, but it's true that part of my job here, I'm already doing my plugin making job. Apparently, nobody wants me to make more than one plugin a week because people are just generally overwhelmed, even at that rate. So as I expand outwards to do other things and hopefully earn more Patreons and all that kind of stuff, or find new things to do, part of my job becomes streaming with people and hanging out with people. And this is a very legitimate job. People are able to do that without even doing plugins. There's lots of people out there. They call them vloggers or live streamers. And as such, I get to share other things that I do rather than talking only about plugins. As you know, because if anybody was watching this stream, they would know that it's always been about, like, Chris from Airwindows tells you a story rather than just, how to operate my plugins. I'm going to take a moment. Yep, I do seem to have people saying, yeah, I was just about to ask whether people were, like, rendered helpless with laughter by that loading ready run clip, which is a video clip. It's not just an audio clip, but it's, the Grapekeeper talks with, well, sometimes I'd be able to do more than one plugin a week, I think. I think there's a number of times where that would be a problem. In fact, I have already scheduled something, which is I've got a few plugins on the list on the Patreon, the stuff from that I said that I was going to reissue. That's down to the last 4 or 5 or so. And I promised myself, once I do the final plugin from that list, I'm taking a week off. Ooh, amazing, right? Who could imagine, like, oh my God, Chris took a week off, the world must be ending. No, when I finish that list, I'll probably rephrase the way that I'm describing it, because most of that list is done now. And it's all about the stuff that I'm working on currently and developing going forward. But I'll definitely take a week off from plugin posting after I do that, because it'll be, it's a real epoch. It is a significant, like, I'll have earned a slight vacation, right? But no, if it was absolutely important or there was a pressing need to do so, I could probably do more than one plugin a week. I'm not sure if I'd be able to persist with it. Like, I'm designing the stuff that I do. I'm designing Patreon, and I'm designing the YouTube streaming thing and such around what I would be able to continue to do. So basically, the next goal that I've got going on is like $1,500 a month, which would be great. That'd be great. That'd be stepping much in the direction of being able to do really cool things. I still have hopes of doing ambitious projects around sort of a Bastel-like thing of putting hardware in people's hands by letting you DIY it. And I have some real striking ideas as to ways that can happen that could only work if a person who is wealthy enough to do things like bulk orders of stuff, or like finding somebody with connections in China to go and get runs of things like LEDs or whatever made for them, or prepared to do orders through places like Alibaba or whatever, and do the homework and research to find, like, working LEDs, working parts, things like chips and stuff. And if somebody with enough resources that they were able to do things like, hey, I'm going to order $10,000 worth of fabricated printed circuit boards in bulk so that I can then begin selling them in a DIY kit so that people could do stuff that they otherwise couldn't do, but for really, 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 really cheaply, and do it at cost. Like, it's possible to do this. It's just that this is not how people end up with $10,000 that they could spend on doing something like that. It takes a crazy person who could build up or inherit resources to choose to spend on a project like that will break even and won't necessarily make them rich, because it's about making society rich, or it's about making their fan base rich, or just making stuff go a little smoother. And the thing that comes to mind is a point behind me at my axolotl, which is in the exact middle of my rack stuff, my Euro rack stuff. And that is a small computer that can be programmed without code, just programmed by, like, I'll talk about Oxalati some future time. But it is a way of sending out trigger output, sending out key changes, things like that. You can make it into its own synthesizer. I've got an input and a output, I think 24-bit, 44.1K analog in and out there that is not being used at all. Oh, here, let me go and check. Boop. I will go see. Let's have a look. Oh, okay, yeah, my site fell over. I'm not sure what's going on. Let me have a quick look and see whether other stuff is also down, because I've got a bunch of different things. Okay, yeah, HostGator is down again. I'm not sure whether they have killed me off the internet again or whether they're just down, but all of my stuff is down, and let's see whether it's available by FTP. Yeah, I can get onto the server, but it's a 502 error, so either HostGator's web serving is down, and that shouldn't necessarily be the case because it's all cached, and all the WordPress stuff that I use is different than it was when it was causing a problem. Also, I'm not getting more hits than usual. I'm not in one of those upsweeps at the moment on the website specifically. Possibly because we're peaking out at the, yeah. No, I'm going to be leaving them, but there's a path through which I must follow it. So let me fool around a little bit while I'm at it and see whether I can't add another kind of source. Oh, that's the properties. So I'm going to create a text. And it is in Helvetica, and it's something about chat log. But I'm not going to use Armorgird. That could be a way that I could do the chat from YouTube. I'm not sure how that works. I'm not sure if that works. But don't mind me, I'm just fussing with stuff. And yeah. Give me properties, and I'll place this somewhere, and I'll take it back away again if I find, but there's nothing much I can do with this text other than what this is. So, yep. But hey, so now I've got a text warning on my stream saying that status. So yay. Doing new things every single time now. We're doing all the new stuff. So yeah, I wonder if there is a way. It might not be a great idea for me to do this on stream. I might just have to leave it at that. Yeah, no, I should follow up on that later. What I'll do is I'll make a web page for Airwindows, and I'll just refresh it. Periodically, I'll check in from time to time. So yeah, if you're here trying to download VoiceTrick, you're probably going to have to wait Although I can test that quite easily. Well, medium easily. I can test that by going to my post and seeing whether I can still download. Nope. Okay, so I can FTP into it, so the site is alive, but they are, shall we say, messing with me again. Or they're crashing and not functional. And we'll just have to see about that. I can check my email and find out whether there's anything about there. No. Nothing so far. I literally have a folder in my email that's entitled HostGator fail. Ah, okay. So actually, no, that's good. That's good because that means that while my hosting service is pants and bad, and I knew that already, so I'll try to move to something better. I'm going to be moving to an Amazon thing. Amazon is also capable of going down. It's always very exciting when they're really huge, so hosting services go down. But what that means is they're not targeting me, which that means my sites will go back when they fix whatever it is that's going wrong. Because if they were targeting me, one, they wouldn't want to admit that's what they were doing because it's not in their terms of service. They just have some lines saying, like, if you're using too much CPU, we can whack you off the internet and leave you there for as long as it takes for you to give up and find somewhere else to host with. But they can't actually acknowledge that because it's not good marketing to do it, or it's not good marketing to admit that you are doing it. So if other people are having 502 errors as well, this is actually good news because it means that they're not targeting me and they'll come back. Most of the time, their stuff at least works. And it's not like it's costing me more than it really should, but not wildly more. Like I have a little story to tell you around stuff like that, which will help to explain my attitude towards things like this. So, you know, I've just been talking about spending money doing fancy things and ordering stuff from places like Alibaba so that I can get large quantities of electronic gear for super duper cheap so that I could resell it at cost. And then people would be able to get stuff. And I mentioned circuit boards, and I mentioned like being able to do $10,000 worth of circuit boards, which would be a pretty big number. And I pointed at, and I moved my stuff. Actually, it's visible right now. I pointed at the axolotl, which I have mounted on a piece of circuit board material, and I carved lots of little holes in that so that I could have the board. And then like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 patches to its inputs/outputs. And the thing about that is many of those can be, well, the thing about, hi TH Wath, the thing about Amazon sticking you with charges is that that's a concern if you're having enormous titanic bursts of bandwidth because that's your type of business. But the type of bandwidth that I use is not especially significant by Amazon standards. Like by the big website standards or by Amazon Cloud Services standards, my bandwidth is not going to be the concern. And frankly, neither is space, neither is hosting and the amount of space that's being taken up. It's all very, like, I have a very penny ante website as far as big website stuff is concerned. So it's more just sort of getting in the game with that. And the you're paying basically as you go. So if I released a new version of new updates.zip and it had everything updated with all of the very newest versions of, like, I've been doing stuff with the floating point dither on the outputs of things. I've been doing stuff like using the random source that I generate for that as my noise source for the denormalization. And I've been refining the code. You can see it in current releases. So if I released a new updates.zip and it was coming off of Amazon Cloud Services and I got charged for the bandwidth of all that happening at once, probably it would cost me like $10 all told. Like, the amount of bandwidth I'm generating is really not very great. This is not a very large operation. This is a little, it's like artisanal. It's like I say on the website, it's like artisanal plugin stuff, bespoke, meaning that I'm sewing them to order for you. The bandwidth that uses is not terribly great, so it doesn't really become a problem exactly. Still, it's a bit of a drag that I don't have Airwindows up at the moment, but then we'll just have to... Oh, hello. Are we trying to load? Come on, you can do it. You can do it. How exciting. We're watching a HostGator outage live. Yay, it came back. Okay, so Bernard, if you needed to go to the site, it should be back. Yay. But yeah, one of the things I was talking about a little bit ago, before I drank coffee and went off on 27 million tangents, is that, like, my job doing this live streaming is partly answering people's questions, but part of it is just sort of entertaining and sharing where my head is at and stuff on a daily basis. Yeah, quick answer to Zachary's question. Right now, I don't know how to do sidechain inputs. This is the problem I keep running into with the plugin business, which is like the worst aspects of the software business and the music business, in that it's like, okay, so they're going to try to DRM everything and invade your computer, but then at the same time, they're also going to not let you know anything that they do. So I've not yet run across anybody who knows how to do sidechain inputs in either AU or VST in order to let me know how that's done. Me and my brother Dan, who doesn't know anything about plugins or audio, are sometimes able to do stuff like this. We have not yet been able to I don't work with sidechain inputs myself, and so that becomes a bit of a problem. I have done before, occasionally, in a DAW, but mostly I don't. Mostly I'm not, and I literally don't know how that is done. If I do find out how it's done, you'll find, sort of on a week-by-week basis, lots of Airwindows compressors coming into new versions that now have sidechain inputs. It would become an obvious path for just redoing a bunch of new stuff and adding new features. It would be very obvious. But for now, I don't know how to do it. So what I might end up doing is showing people stuff on the live stream that's about other things that I'm doing. Like, I have frequently, including in the teaser image for the voice trick video, showed off sort of the half-assembled version of my SciDemon Eurorack module, and I'm making several of those for my own use, but I hope to show people how to do it. And showing people how to do it implies that I'd be letting them DIY it, meaning that I would be giving them, say, pieces of this perf board that I've got, jacks to use, the chip that I'm using, the switches that I found, And the thing about that stuff is you can get like a Mouser shopping cart. You can send people to a electronics wholesaler like Mouser, set them up with a shopping cart, and they go, okay, so all told this costs me about $30 or about $60 to buy all of these things. But if you were doing that, it would be costing you the highest price in all of the individual parts because you're not getting any of them in bulk. If you're willing to get things like these jacks or this perf board, like seriously in bulk, the prices start coming down real fast to the point where it can be almost half as much cost as it would buying small quantities. And that would mean it would be a lot more accessible for people to do that work if there was somebody who was willing to buy it in enormous bulk and then just sort of repackage it and send it out at cost. And so I'm looking at that prospect. With regard to the Axolotl behind me, what I'm looking at is figuring out a way to get a circuit board fabricated and it may or may not involve doing it up to the point where you'd have buffer amplifiers in there. And you'd be using, because the deal with the Axolotl is I'm powering it off of, I think I'm powering it off of the 12-volt rail using, it's got a 9-volt input as well as being powerable by USB. And so what I'm doing is running the 12-volt voltage input into the 9-volt input, which has a voltage regulator on it. So that basically does the job of taking it down to what's workable. And the part that it uses is capable of doing that. So it's getting power from the rack power. And then I basically just carved a bunch of holes in it so that I could put jacks in, and then wired the jacks to places on the circuit board where the inputs and outputs go. And the neat thing about an Axolotl is that you get to use stuff as either inputs or outputs. So since I'm not running it through buffer amplifiers and things, and as long as I'm careful, because I can kill the board by, say, this is the thing that I devised for doing stuff with the Moog Mother 32. It's a short circuit. It's just a little Eurorack connector, except for that I just put tinfoil over the output, and I may have soldered it together as well, but it's just a short circuit. It's like a single chunk of metal. And I can put that into the Mother 32 and do certain things like have some of the knobs go to 0 voltages because they're blending between 2 different voltages, and you can make one of them be ground by using that. But if I put that on the output of one of the Axolotls as I have it wired up, it would probably kill the board because the Axolotl expects to be looking into appropriate circuitry, and mine pretty much isn't. Mine is designed in such a way where I could tell the software, oh, this is now an input, and then be able to run something into it. And as long as I can find the voltages to what it expects to see, which is like 0 to 5 volts and nothing else, then that would work all day long and be fine. If I ran Eurorack voltages as a trigger voltage into that, it would probably break it. And so that's delicate. But the other thing about it is, as far as I know, nobody makes a thing where you can mount the Axolotl into a Eurorack enclosure, much less mounted in a tiny little size like that where it's not taking up a lot of space, because that's a pretty full-fledged computer. But it is usually is placed in these larger boxes that are kind of cumbersome, and the board itself has to be split into 2 boards and then have jumper wires added to it, which you can just barely see in the side there, in order to fit it into a Eurorack-sized space. And it could be fairly small if you're not using outputs, or you could get a bunch of Eurorack in, jacks and wire those to the part of the board that handles outputs and things. My point being, I do intend to come up with a design for just, this is a printed circuit board that has had all of the little holes and things carved out, so that you don't have to do the drilling and stuff, because the drilling was kind of fussy. I was carving this perf board material up, and it's kind of sketchy, and it works, but it's definitely a little shaky. It should be possible to get produced some PC board material just by virtue of you can get that stuff fabricated. You can get PC boards made, you can get stuff drilled out. It should be possible to do that, and then have like 1,000 of these boards, and you'd have to get your own Axolotl, but that costs $70, and that's not really very difficult. It's just that you need to incorporate it into something to have it be useful. Well, that would make it so that they could all be put into Eurorack, and the potential for that is quite wonderful, because it becomes a sort of little general purpose, do anything you want kind of thing, kind of like Ornament and Crime, or other Eurorack modules that are basically computers. But this is a computer with a different programming language than most, and the possibilities there are very exciting. So, yeah. Patrick Elfinar is asking, do you think it will ever be possible to create a plugin that it would fix phase automatically? Oh, by the way, turrets, yeah, thank you. You don't have to click on it's like, I'm never going to actually make a living off of YouTube, even if it became super viral and stuff, because it's just, that's why Patreon was invented, was that YouTube is not really practical. But, hey, cool. 100th of a cent. Yay. I'll buy a grain of coffee. I'll buy a coffee bean. That'll be great. So, plugin to fix phase automatically. I don't think so. I don't think it's possible to get 10 piano notes out of phase and the others in phase. Are you talking about exactly the same frequency? It becomes almost like you're asking the wrong question, in that often what you want to have stuff out of phase some of the time, because it's part of what makes a sound be a sound. It's an interesting question, certainly, because when you say stuff like fix phase, that's a loaded question, because you're defining phase as something it's possible to be broken. And that ain't necessarily so. Instead, phase will be doing something that you don't want, or doing something that you do want. The obvious example is if you have a EDM mix, for instance. You've got a kick drum and you've got a bass, and you're doing psytrance, so basically your triggering is kick, bass, 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 kick, bass, 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 and so it's not even a problem. Hey. Okay, so imagine that it is a problem because some of your accents have the kick and the bass at the same time. And if they're both sample-based and being triggered exactly at the same instant, like you can do in a DAW, then they might be combining in such a way where all of a sudden on that attack, your bass is missing, because they had very comparable frequencies, and they canceled each other out. So it's like a dropout in the bass for that particular note, because the way it happens, they are triggered always out of phase enough to destructively interfere with each other. Now, you could call that a problem, or you could call it an opportunity. Like, here, I'll whip out the pen and paper and draw things. So, say you're defining a kick out of some sounds. You got a square sound and you got a round sound, and they're making these waveforms. And the waveforms are out of phase, as you see. So when you combine these two, both of them have bass, but when you combine them, all of a sudden you get a big nothing. It's not working at all. Well, that can be handled in a number of different ways. You could time offset some of the waveforms. So if this guy got moved to here, you'd start out with the other one and then start incorporating the other thing, and then you'd wind up with a reinforced sound that was even bassier. And you could call that fixed, or you could call it just you chose to do that thing, because there's other possible things that can be done. And here's one of them, like, I'll say TT for Ted Templeman. In this case, this is a frequency response chart. And he might have a kick drum equalized like this, where this is a bass note, and then there's a huge dropout here, and then it starts to come back, and it's probably got a clicky quality, so it's louder here in the high frequencies. And what I'll then do is put in a bass guitar where the bass notes resonate here, and it fills in this space. And this is an old Ted Templeman trick. It was done on old Doobie Brothers, and it was done on early Van Halen. Probably all Van Halen, actually. They started getting a sound together, and they stuck with it. But Ted Templeman had a role in that early stuff of sculpting some of these things. And he set up the drums and bass in a characteristic way. I'm not sure whether he came up with that one himself. Like, I've been talking about my live streaming and stuff. Well, if I start doing the Wednesday live streams after hitting $1,500 a month, yay, then I'll be talking about specific records, you know, live, and you probably won't get to know which one until I start, because that'll give me a little bit of a head start before, like, record labels figure out I'm live streaming about something and playing excerpts of music and shut down my audio. We'll see to what extent that happens. I'm not going to be playing entire songs, I know that. But I'll be talking about this very stuff. So there'll be more of this on Wednesdays if that happens. But this is Ted Templeman's thing, which is present in the Doobie Brothers stuff that he did, and in the Van Halen stuff that he did. He'd equalize the kick to have a hole in which the bass went. And it produced a really effective, like, radio-friendly, you know, listener-friendly kind of sound. And this is something that continues to this day. Like, when you talk about fixing phase, we're probably not talking about piano notes. That is not necessarily what one does. But if you're making, like, any form of music, like, you could be making rock music, you could be making pop music, you could be making big room house music, which is a very tightly restrained style where it's all about big synthesizer riffs and a pounding beat, and just incredibly, everything is very similar to each other, but you're still dealing with certain things you just can't do. And among the things you just can't do are, if you had, you know, your Ted Templeman had the bass boost here, and then mid-range, you know, low mids or high bass for the bass guitar, and then stuff. So if you have your bass doing that, and you have your kick drum also doing that, then it's just not going to sound good. It's not going to be well-rounded. And because it'll be kind of too rounded, you'll have this extreme density at a certain frequency. Well, that is okay, so I got a little more information now. The VST pianos with notes out of phase, not sounding natural. The thing about that is, how are you going to get into the VST piano in order to doctor specific notes? Are you going to do separate pianos? You could do that without any use of a plugin, but it would be kind of kludgy. It would be kind of weird. Essentially, if your one piano is playing, these notes and they're canceling and something is wrong and not working out, and you needed to come up with some kind of fix for it, what you could do is run a separate track and either take particular notes and EQ them so that the bit that you want sounds weird relative to the other notes, or delay them, like a little tiny sample delay in there, so that they're technically that, or you might be sounding stuff off of a piano roll. So just zoom in and don't sound all the notes at the same time. Sound some of the notes at the same time. Because if this is consistently happening, you've got to be triggering them all at the same time using piano roll. I don't think this could happen if you're playing stuff in live. It'll never be quite the same twice, because you're talking about interference of actual notes. If that's repetitively happening, you have sample accurate sound triggering. And if you delay one of them in the piano roll just a tiny bit, you're going to change the cancellation completely. So that might be your best bet there. Is if you've got notes canceling, you're clearly triggering them all at the same instant. And, you'll be running into the same problem if you had two different sample pianos. You'd be running into the same problem if you used two channels of the piano and delayed one of them. So I would go with the sounding of the notes in the first place. Have them triggered at slightly different. I'm not sure you need to go to that much effort with it. Nor do I think it's because Ellen phase. I'm not sure what Ellen phase is, but I've heard of stuff like this. There's stuff you can get that will use this sort of phase rotator. And you can set it up so that literally every possible sound that you have starts out with a positive swing. And some guys, I know that William Whitman, noted for mixing Cyndi Lauper and a whole bunch of other stuff besides, and also a good bass player, is very fond of the massage all of the phase things on Ataxis stuff. And he's a big fan of that particular tool, which I don't remember what it is, but it's not one of mine anyway. He's a big fan of that thing, which is hey, put this on all of your tracks and process all of your tracks, which sounds to me like a terrible idea. And then all of your tracks are automatically going to have a onset transient that is in phase and positive and stuff, and it can be just locked in. And in many ways, I think that is a fool's errand unless you're doing psytrance and stuff, electronic stuff, where that all of the sounds are both going to be repetitive samples that are always exactly the same, and they're going to be hitting at exactly the same nanosecond. And it's just a genre that's incredibly tightly wound and incredibly tightly timed. Those are the times when you start learning the Ted Templeman lessons and such. And those are the times when it matters whether the attacks are in phase or out of phase, because it's always going to hit the same. And again, one of your ways of dealing with that could be just to, if you're using a piano roll for sequencing this stuff, which is probably what's happening, you can time delay it a little bit just in the triggering. Not only that, if you have external MIDI, each of these individual notes, if you're sending stuff to external MIDI, you can't send them simultaneously. Maybe in a DAW you can. If the DAW is talking to itself using MIDI, then even then you can't. But MIDI is a serial protocol, so it can only send one note at a time. So time delaying one of the notes for the purposes of messing with the phase is actually your friend, as is taking some of the things like, say, if you've got a tambourine sound or something and it's too aggressive, you can scooch the entire sound back in the piano roll tiny bit in order to have it not be fired off at the same instant as the other sounds. And that'll both mess with your like here. I'm going to draw a hopefully tightly timed little what you don't see is I'm drawing something on here. So what I've just drawn is essentially Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band reprise as a drum pattern. It's boom, ksh, boom, boom, ksh. And if you listened to the actual drums as Ringo was playing them, and the way those are timed, the kick drum is coming in kind of fast. There's a lot of impact to it. And the snare drum is not exactly flamming, but the snare drum is not as fast as the kick drum. It has a little more weight behind it, partly because Ringo was using heavier sticks and he wasn't a very big guy, so there was this like swinging the log down to hit the snare drum. It makes it come through a little bit slower, but that's a long, well-known way of making a backbeat that is heavy, is to have the backbeat just a hair late. And then the hat is not in front of the kick drum, like you might get with Stuart Copeland and on Police records, but it's just a hair behind the beat, and then the offbeat, doom-cha, 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 is also a little bit slower. And this just produces swing, but this is not randomness swing. This is ways of shading things around the harsh metronomic beat, because there's a big difference between that and if I was to say draw stuff the way the computer would do it. And I'll take a moment to do that. You won't even be able to see the hats on beat because they'll blend in with the bar lines I'm drawing. If you had the computer doing it, it would look like this. It would be like on the beat, tick, 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 snare, tick, boom, boom, snare, tick. And that is like computer timing. And we can do that stuff with drum machines and things like that as well. But there's a big difference between that and the slight blurring effect of like this kick drum is coming in really aggressively, the snare is lagging a little bit. These are the things that make a drum performance sound like a human being or sound like it has swing and reality to it or weight or size, and something that sounds like a Casio going incredibly stiff and artificial. And that's fine in its way, but in order to work with all kinds of sounds, like I was recently I was listening to a guy who's also a YouTube video maker and streamer. Guy goes by Todd in the Shadows, and he's a music reviewer. Kind of like a lot of his stuff. And he was looking into a Rihanna song. And I'd read a book about how they make music these days. I forget the name of it at the moment, so I'll tell you in some other stream. But I learned that Rihanna started out with a song called Umbrella, and Jay-Z's on it and introduces her, and then she's singing this song, and there's a particular vibe to it, and she does snap out her delivery is really crisp, and you can tell why it's being successful. You can tell why it is being popular. But what struck me about it was like, okay, the beat behind this is not just like your 808 or something. Instead, I noticed that the beat behind it, the kick drum and the dance music that was, what you expect for like rap, pop song, what they make these days, was a very kind of rock and roll, dense, busy sort of organic kick drum. It wasn't just a synthetic kick. This pop song had almost like a heavy metal beefiness to the way the track was coming across that was completely belied by the fact that it was this light, sort of ditzy pop song. And that is something that remains useful. And that is the sort of thing I'm talking about when I'm explaining how the metronomic computer beat that you get from here might need to be changed into something like this Ringo beat, where this is kind of early, this is kind of late, compared to how the computer would do it. And it's not at all random. Instead, it is calculated and arrived at by drummers who, played live for years and worked out what felt right. Because your snare drum makes a big loud sound. If you want it to sound like the band is big and huge and powerful, you might not want it to be super quick and just like tick happening when the instant of time happens. Maybe you want to make it feel like an explosion back behind the band pushing it along. And these are all things that can be done through learning more about how stuff like timing and groove works. It's also kind of like Parliament Funkadelic. And James Brown, before them, are based around this. The one. This is the one. So all of your rhythmic stuff goes along, but everybody has to hit the one with real power and intensity. It'll probably come across a little bit early. If you're doing lots of cocaine while playing it and stuff, you'll be hitting the one with extreme aggression. But you can be extremely vague and foggy about other rhythmic elements as long as everything sort of dials in, and maybe your picture of the song as you're performing it is these various elements floating around. But if you remember the one, then as the start of the bar rolls around, everybody just, bam, hits the one super aggressively, and that tells the listener, dancers, etc., where the music is at, how it's coming out. And it's your orienting factor. Bill Bruford was talking about the same kind of thing when in 1980s King Crimson he was working with all of these really strange polyrhythms. And it'd be like, okay, I can play a 13 with my hands, and I can play a 17 with my other hand, and then there's this electronic percussion over here, and Adrian Belew is playing a thing, and that's a 21 over 8. And how do I tie this stuff together without the audience becoming completely lost? And again, Bill would arrive at the one. He would put a kick drum in, and it would be regular, and it would be repeating, and it would be your anchor point off which this other stuff would do its more interesting polyrhythmic kinds of things. Oh, hi Bo. You got a phone call. What did I miss? Nothing much. This is not going... I'm not sure what kind of stream this is. I got a whole bunch of different things out to show people in the service of talking about other stuff I can do with live streams. For instance, the stuff on my desk includes this, which is a set of diodes wired to a plug. And I've now dropped it on the floor. Where'd it go, I wonder? You know something? Hopefully I'll find that one day, because I can't do anything about it right now. I'll either find it or I'll crush it to death beneath the wheels of my chair. I have 3 others right here, so I'm not worried. But part of what I'd like to do is set people up so that they can build stuff like that and know what they're doing. Then I was also talking about other things that I built, like this little leather dingus is for the purpose of taking a Xiaomi Yi camera, which I have... This is like jailbreaking a Yi. If you take it apart to the point where you can remove the lens, you can that lens unscrews, and it's focused by changing the direction of it. So I've marked it in such a way that I can take this, put it over the lens, pinch the outside edge, and twist it without touching the glass on the lens. So this sits around on my desk because it's my Xiaomi Yi camera focuser. Even though my phone now is much better quality than the Yi. Which is why the Yi is now set to a focus distance of 6 inches, because the purpose of this is... Here, I'll show you. This is the new style, right? Like, all of my videos are going to be made like this now. Everybody needs to wear these hats. I should have this be a one of my teaser images for one of my videos. I need to grab a copy of it. But it's the new hat. Do you know why I would do such a thing? Oh, here, I'd better... I'll hold this, like the voice trick image. Do you know why I would do this crazy thing? Because it's going to be an animation tool. And if I record stuff with this, which is kept charged and ready to go, it's locked exactly to my head. The microphone is like in front of my mouth, and it does pretty good recordings. It's like it'll be an MP3 version of the recording, or AAC or something. It encodes it, but the positioning of it and the quality of the microphone and the quality of the circuitry, there's not even any compression in here. It's just a really raw, pretty accurate, small microphone, small condenser microphone. And, you know, for that reason, I can get a pretty good voice recording on it. If I record using that, I'll have a voice recording synchronized with my face, which will actually be upside down because this is how it's supposed to be. And then what I've got is a set of scripts that I run in the terminal. And the scripts are for using FFmpeg, which is freely downloadable, to do various things to the camera capture. And what those things do, and this is another innovation, but this is something that I don't think anybody is up to speed with yet. I don't know anybody doing this. I think if they were doing this, I would know about it, because it's one of those like Airwindows style tricks that just gives you stuff that you wouldn't have otherwise. What you do is you take the recording and you take a keyframe where, you know, you're wearing the thing on your head and making a neutral expression, probably with your eyes closed. Save that as a picture. Run the script. The script flips the image right side up again. The script shrinks the image down to a smaller size, although you wouldn't have to, but it does. the script changes the audio and video in pitch to allow you to do stuff like this is just long strand acrylic fur fabric. There's no specific kind of fur. Technically, I know for a fact this is Monterey Mills, and it's Monterey Mills really heavy pile fur. It's about 3 inches in length. No, not. It's fairly heavy rather than being really short plush. And pretty much anything you get that is really thick, long fur would work as well. You know, the heavier it is, the more it will obscure high frequencies as well as damping sound. And I may or may not keep this or come up with a way of no, it's not from pillows. It is costume fur fabric. So it's a material. You could make like a little, like I've done, a little sock with this, and then put it around the microphone, and that becomes your windscreen. It does work as a very good windscreen. You could almost use fluff from pillows. It wouldn't necessarily be great. It wouldn't necessarily be bad. You'd probably get more high frequencies out of it. So yeah, that's a possibility. Another thing that I've used is that stuff from loofahs. It's sort of, you know, sand your skin off kind of loofah, scrubby stuff. That also is very open-celled, and that is very good at breaking up pops as well. But yeah, what you would do with this device that I just showed you, again, another wild thing that I've built or manufactured and stuff that I'm trying to get other people to learn how to do these things too. You'd make your movie of it, and it would have the audio. You could change the pitch of the audio and the video to still match up so that you have a pitch shifted version that's just been basically sample rate changed. So it doesn't even have to be, it's being resampled rather than recalculated. So you can get a very good quality pitch shift that way, and that can make you do like cartoon voices. So there's the deal. I use some inside SM58s too. In fact, it's seen in the voice trick video. So the script for FFmpeg flips it and makes it smaller, changes the pitch, changes the speed of the video, resamples the video down to 15 frames per second, and then delays the frames. Either delays the video or delays the frames. I forget which, the audio or the video. But there is a classic Disney trick where, again, voice trick, the one weird trick. If you know these things, you get to do wonderful things. Where if they were sampling, if they were synchronizing cartoon voice acting with the cartoon itself, and the mouth motions exactly matched what was on the audio track, it would not seem right. It would not seem as if the character was saying it. But if you delayed... Yeah, I know. It's awesome. Airwindows.com is back. If you delay, I think, the video or possibly the audio by just a couple of frames, then all of a sudden it seems as if the cartoon character is saying the thing that the voice track is saying. So I have a script that does that for me. So what you end up with is a movie that is running at 15 frames per second, or you could have it be 12 or whatever, and has a audio track that is the final audio that is, you know, a small size, and you bring that into an animation project. And I have not yet done this, but I'm looking forward to it. Bring it into an animation project, and then you have a little reference picture. I'm also doing some clever things like the picture that you take, which is a neutral expression. The same script lets you bring in that picture and then sort of Photoshop overlay mode it, like Photoshop difference mode or exclusion mode, so that the image goes very gray and monochrome and very low contrast, but then any departure from the image that is the still image shows up with much higher contrast. And what that means is anything like position of eyelids or change of expression starts coming out in high contrast, much more than you'd normally see, and you're seeing that contrast relative to what a neutral face would be. So if you're working frame by frame, it becomes possible to set things up with, say, controls, like you're puppeting a character, and the character acts in this particular way. So you got your 15 frames a second because you're animating, and your puppeted character, and you're controlling, say, eye blinks or whatever. So you just step through the frames, watching the guide video that you've generated, which is this tiny reference video that shows these distinctions between neutrality and not, and you just chase individual elements on a frame-by-frame basis, like adjusting it as you go with some kind of quick reference, or if you're hand animating, you could just be drawing them in bit by bit, like here's my character, and oh, here's a raised eyebrow, and then you draw the eyebrow raised for that frame, and then back down again. And you'd be able to step through rapidly for part after part and really quickly assemble a human-directed and live-acted, but still entirely cartoon character, either, puppeted or even hand-animated. It's basically just the ideal shortcut. It's like auto-tune for animating. As long as you can do a performance while doing the actual voice acting, then it will make it possible to chase the smallest details, like the micro... Often when I'm recording videos for the Airwindows stuff, and I'm listening critically to something, I'll hit play and I'll be adjusting something, and without knowing it, my eyes just start blinking like crazy. I think that's when I'm hearing something really interesting. Like that's just how that works. And I've seen some producers do the same thing in like the classic albums DVDs. Sometimes you'll hear them play something back and they'll be adjusting it or whatever, and they'll get the same thing. There's actually a reason for blinking. It's like blinking is what shows you individual thoughts. And if you're doing editing of movies or animation or video, often shots can be timed or delineated by blinks. And there's a fellow who did a classic book on movie editing. I forget them, Walter Murch, I think it is. And he found that when he was editing the movie The Conversation with Gene Hackman in it, he was trying to represent Gene Hackman having thoughts and showing those as individual shots. Like you cut from Hackman having a thought to something else and then back and forth and so on. It would be shots that make up a movie. That's how they do it. And what he would find is that when he was watching Hackman trying to get a sense of his attitude and trying to cut the shot at appropriate times, he would over and over again cut the movie film at the instant that Gene Hackman blinked. He's timing it individually. He's not doing it like that on purpose. But all the same, when he was trying to make the shot work with the way Gene Hackman was having thoughts and feelings and synchronize with how the character was feeling, the movie editor would be playing stuff and going, okay, there, and hit the frame or whatever, make a mark on the frame, make a mark on the movie as it's going by, and be like, okay, I cut there. Oh, look, that's the frame in which he's blinking again. And that's a very interesting observation. It's a very interesting discovery that probably also prompts the really fast blinking from when I'm mixing or adjusting something in a plugin on a video, and you see my eyes just go like crazy. And the neat thing about it is that if you are using a device like this, which is roughly a $70 camera and a bike helmet and a bunch of aluminum wire, make something like this. You can see that the camera has a normal mount, so you get a bolt and you attach it to the aluminum wire. You see it's wrapped around. There's several different places where it's wrapped around, and then it comes out to the helmet like this. And you bolt it on with a wing nut. The thing about all of that is if you are doing a video, and for all I know, nobody that is watching this is doing animation or anything, but then maybe if I start doing that, people will start becoming interested. And we'll be looking into my old recordings going like, has he talked about how he did that? Oh, look, he has. Your performance into this goofy dingus that basically just records your voice and also it's also recording your face. It will capture every blink. If you're hand animating something like that, it will become trivial, effortless to have your character appear to have the same sequence of thoughts while they're delivering their lines and doing that kind of stuff. Like if you throw yourself into the acting to the point where you're having the feelings of the character and just channeling them, which is another reason why it's on a bike helmet, because if you're actually getting into it, you will wind up making head motions. And it's impossible to emote while holding your head like it is in a vice. It's not that it perfectly tracks that. Sometimes it'll get thrown crooked or whatever. But these are just ways of, I'm tempted to say cheating, getting results in a way that you don't have to be like Disney with $1 million budget to do things. And that's very on brand for what I do. Again, I'm looking forward to diving into some of this and seeing what else I can make happen. Because I'm already doing plugins. I've got enough room and attention and energy to do other stuff as long as I'm not in a tearing hurry about it. So it's going to be a thing of like, can I come up with, because what I'm going to want to do, yeah, blink is a natural into a thought, tell me. What I'm going to do is come up with ways to describe things like this, where you can get something together that's just a kind of improvised, homebrew, build your own DIY kind of thing. And then hopefully also find stuff like I mentioned using FFmpeg for processing the video capture from that to put it into the format where you can have like a 320 by 240 video at 15 FPS rather than much, much larger. Because you don't necessarily need a very large reference to know what you're doing with the animation. You just need the audio to be right. And FFmpeg is free. FFmpeg is open source. Like my stuff is open source. And I actually have a license from a while back when I had a stroke of good fortune and was like, I can invest some money in various things and should probably do that. And one of the things that I did was I got into Toon Boom Studio. That is like the Moog synthesizer of animation software, which is very neat, although I'm not up to date. Like, I haven't even really been using it. I just bought a permanent license because I thought they were going to stop making those available at some point. So I just wanted to make sure that I got into that technology while you could still buy it and own it forever. I'm not sure whether they're going to kill the permanent licenses or not. It depends upon whether they have a soul and are good people or not. But the point being, I got into a variation of this animation technology and haven't really started to use it in any way, because that's part of my notion of building tools for people. I'd like that to be another outlet of expression that people can do. And although you cannot be a poverty-stricken person with nothing but a home-built PC and a lot of time, you can't do that and be working with Toon Boom. Toon Boom is heinously expensive, probably always will be. It's what you do if you are working animation studio and need top-of-the-line stuff. It's like your Moog synthesizer. It's like your, Photoshop, Adobe Creative Cloud kind of thing, where it's price of admission. And then you teach yourself how to use it, which is a lifetime's worth of work. But if you can get, as you can, stuff that's like, okay, we don't have all the puppeteering thing, but we can have a animation program. It's free, it's open source, it's hand animation, and you draw it frame by frame. You can get that kind of stuff. It's just harder to do. It doesn't offer you as many labor-saving features. But if you can get that and load in a track where one of your video sequences is 15 frames per second come off of this, that means that immediately you can use your free hand-drawn animation thing that doesn't have all the features and combine it with your reference footage from this rig and the voice stuff, and suddenly you have a crudely hand-drawn thing that's going to be somewhat time-consuming because it doesn't have all of the labor-saving features of big, expensive animation software. But you'd be able to have performances on a par with anything that anybody would want. All you'd need to do is be able to capture voice acting. And as it happens, this particular rig with the Azimuth E, which is about $70 worth of camera, it just happens to have a microphone that is, for one, hackable. I took this apart and took all of the protective surfaces off the microphone so that it's very exposed. So if you wear it on your head, the mic is just right here, and you get a pretty good sound out of it if you're just doing voice acting capture. And, your voice is right here. If you're that close to it, you get a good strong signal, and it's possible to distort it if you shout or perform really loud. And if it distorts, it just distorts fairly cleanly, and that gets recorded, so that becomes part of your voice acting performance. It's not the most sophisticated thing in the world, but it's workable. It's workable, and it does capture tonality and such fairly well. If you wanted to be really fancy about it, what you could do is go into a closet with a lot of clothing hanging, or anywhere else, put a blanket over yourself, where you're suppressing extraneous sound like you are podcasting. And you wear this like you're in an audio tent, where the tent is just suppressing extraneous sound. Or you're in a vocal booth that is all foam and stuff. If you're, my peeps are basically studio people, so you might already have a vocal booth. You take this into something like the vocal booth, the audio recapture is already good, and all you need is just enough lighting to be able to see your face, and you're good to go. Ideally fairly even lighting so that some of the tricks would work best. But that is the whole idea, is when I'm working on stuff that's like Airwindows related, and it's very much on brand. It's like the kind of stuff that I do. I'll be making plugins. I'll be explaining about how to do beats with groove in them like this, or suggesting, change the phase of your piano notes like this by having two separate tracks and then delaying one, or this very multimedia, multidisciplinary kind of stuff, where there's also things to talk about in, say, animation. I've been fascinated with animation for decades. And I've never really done much of it because I've always had to work on audio and stuff. But then I've always fiddled around with some of these other disciplines. You know, like I've learned how to do some watercolor painting fairly well. Not great, but I know how to control the pigments and things. And that is a way of getting very useful results out of images. And doing watercolor painting gets you some very organic, very accessible stuff. In fact, if I was to start doing graphic user interface VSTs, and me and my brother Dan are going to explore seeing what we can make happen that way, because I have very specific ideas about stuff that I want to have happen, but then there's also the art thing. I had a fella showing up, I think, on Facebook, and he very earnestly was trying to persuade me that I should add GUI and he would be happy to design them, and he was great at designing the GUIs and he could make it look really pretty. And I had to tell him, it's not that. I don't know how. I need to have the GUI functioning, so if you can program that for me. And he was like, I cannot program that for you because I can make the stuff be really pretty and you need the stuff to look really pretty. And I'm like, yeah, I get that, but I can't do the programming to put the pictures on the screen right now. And if I learn how to put the pictures on a screen in a way that is reliable and consistent, and it's surely doable because VST makers have been doing this for frickin' decades now. If I learn to do that for myself, and not by doing something really complicated that's going to limit my access to, like, even if I was able to figure out how Juice worked. Juice is a sort of middleware layer for exporting to many different kinds of plugins and doing that, but it's so heinously complicated to me that I can't even begin to approach it. And then you're also limited to very recent computers and very recent forms of things because it keeps upgrading and it keeps updating. It stays current rather than establishing something that works over a large number of things. And I'd rather target a way of making VST. And it's probably not going to be audio unit because that's a whole separate way of doing stuff and some people find it very difficult. Oh, no. If I was able to put the pictures on the screen, I would be doing stuff like watercolor painting background images for the plugins. And then maybe finding a way of scaling them. So that would be possibly a thing. But I'd be like watercolor painting the background images and finding a way of scaling them, finding a way of doing knobs. There's a number of different ways of doing that stuff. And I'd be able to do something that was very artistic and interesting. And I have used plugin designs before. In fact, let me see just for a moment whether... Oh, and I should take this away because it's no longer true. So... Airwindows.com is not down anymore. It's back, as far as I know. Image. So what I'm going to do is take a moment to open an image file. Rather awkwardly positioned. Don't mind me, I'm just looking stuff up. So I'm going to a place where I can find... I don't think I have any really well-designed things, but... Oh no, definitely not that. But I have some images and things. Oh, some of these are horrible designs, but this is one. I have horrible designs and this is one. Let's use that. So yeah, this is covering me up. But I've designed graphics before. That was back in the olden days when I was building stuff in Real Basic, and Real Basic comes with the ability to do GUIs as part of itself. It just doesn't let you host things inside plugins, inside DAWs, and it doesn't even process in real time. So that was very heavily delayed. But as you can see, I have been working out how to do things like that from a long time ago. It's just not convenient right now as to me specifically using this. I'll leave that on for the time being because chat is not moving very fast, so it can cover up chat. You can also see that that's back in the system 8 days. This is before OS X. It's really old school. But this is what I had. I wrote code to make those knobs. The knobs didn't exist until I wrote them. So that's one example of a interface look that I could make. And it's very gray. It's very kind of Airwindows-y in a way, in that it is pretty generic and vanilla. You'll notice no tick marks, no adjustments. You're supposed to just go by ear. You'll notice that all of those knobs are different sizes, and that's for a reason. It's because the big knob is gain, and then there's a left and a right, which are left and right. And then there's even smaller knobs, which are for other things. I forget exactly what, but... And then you've got a sidechain compressor, which is basically a compressor, and it's got some stuff going on in that. You've got the level, and you've got a drive. Those both relate to the compressor. And the sidechain compressor is a parallel compression. And it's got its level, it's got its mix, it's got release. And what Cask does is that's just multiple poles of compression. I've got that going on. That's not a new thing. I've got that in current plugins. That's, for instance, what Purist Squish does. Purist Squish has what is depicted as Cask on this, in that it has multiple stages of compression going on. And you've got the distortion setup. Drive is most likely the sine-based stuff that I'm using. Drive is basically, it's not Purist Drive, but it's basically density, if I'm not mistaken. And then overdrive is another level of gain, I think. And second, third, and fifth is PAF Nutty. So what you're seeing here is a old version of GUI in which you're starting to see some of the ways that I'd arrange things if I was doing stuff with knobs and GUIs and interfaces. Like we've got the limiter has a recovery and a sharpness. I don't know exactly what the sharpness means, but in this case, the max output is a number rather than a knob. So rather than being dB down, that is like in 16-bit, assuming you're using 16-bit. It's just scaled to what 16-bit would be. And then there's a look ahead for this limiter, and that's how much the look ahead is, because it's not, it's batch processed anyway, so it can have any look ahead you want. I think I've had some versions of mastering tools that even scanned the entire file first before doing anything. And then down in the dither noise shaping, 10.9s became vinyl dither. And a lot of these other things are just fussy little details, or the numbered stuff at the bottom is delay taps. And so this GUI allows you to type in text a lot. And that's something else that could be useful sometimes to include. And yeah, the 116 dialog boxes, that is the way that whatever one you select pre-populates those. Like the pop-up thing, which is 10.9s at the moment. If you select something out of there, it will pre-populate all of those in various ways. Like you'll see that having selected 10.9s, the box that says high pass is 0, and then 99999, there's 10 of those. And then the 5, I think, is the same, unless it's smaller than that. It could be 0, 999, I'm not exactly sure. But what that means is the fifth delay tap on the feedback, and this is the earlier version of it, is starting with a high pass of that level. It's not quite one really significant bit in size. And then there is a feedback, the IIR trim and IIR density above that final line is 1.109s, and the density looks like to be about 1.062. And I think that fifth tap is actually 0.0 and then 10 nines after that. Everything was about having 10 nines on the bottom of it. It was like almost to another point, but not quite, because it was this very fussy dither. And if you went to the like 1 for some of these things, it would just feed back and die. It would just blow up. So that is one example of plugins that I've done that were visual. Let me take a second and fool with that some more. Like, I can show you a different one. I've done this before. There's no reason I can't do it again. Some of it is kind of annoying. Like, for instance, if you had, say, this one, there are no knobs. I had not figured out how to do knobs yet. So that is an example of, that's like worse than the sliders. That was back when I was programming this stuff and all I had was text boxes. Although you'll notice that there is a thing called azimuth sort of up top, and it draws a line. It draws a red line. And that is a thing that, I had the little screen that draws the red line for azimuth. And that's for fixing recordings off of tape that didn't line up perfectly timing-wise. And then the acoustic space synthesis is some kind of strange early reflections bank. And that has too much going on in it to be able to make with sliders. Like, that would be 2 miles of sliders if I was to use those. So there are some things that I can do in a plugin that I can't do with the generic interface because it has to be simpler. And then again, if I was to go back to here and find one of the don't know if I have, yeah, some of those are big and fancy. Oh yeah, there we go. So some of them I have looking kind of cute and stuff, and I would be more than happy to make stuff that looked like that, because the thing is, something like that, it's fairly clear as to what it is. That is a big gain knob, because this is it's mastering tools, so the idea is it's mastering. So the big gain knob, and you can click on a spot and move it sort of radially. It's one of those ones that sort of tries to be fancy and track the rotation by dragging stuff around rather than dragging it just up and down. But it's possible to do both kinds. This just happens to be the kind that, you drag it in the direction that it's supposed to go, and it hopefully understands what you meant. The ginormous knob is, of course, gain, which also means that you can get more fidelity of adjustment. Then there's also the possibility of clicking on something like that and then dragging off the surface of the knob so that you can continue to fuss in finer increments. And then you've got left and right, and wide is an early version of stereo effects. And Chase Azimuth has no controls on it anymore, but I apparently set it up in such a way that it defaulted to something useful. And drive, tilt, contrast, sheen, glue, and focus are all individual knobs, much like the the straight line faders that we use in current Airwindows. But they're just a bank of possible tonal adjustments that you can make during the mastering process. And it's not so much about EQ or whatever, but identifying funny little things that can be done with the style of tone shaping. So yeah, the old versions of mastering tools contained stuff that does speak to what I might do if I was to do GUI. And you could end up with a plugin that looked kind of like that. Or indeed a plugin that looked like, that only the background is a watercolor painting of some kind, so it's more colorful and pretty, because people do have the concern that if they're working with plugins and all the plugins look exactly the same, they find it disorienting. And this is assuming that you have all the plugins spread out over an enormous monitor, so you have to be able to spot what is where. And the thing about having the really minimal gray or generic UI is that if people do have stuff scattered all over their screen, it all looks the same. So it's not great. And yeah, these Bo asked about 5 minutes ago, but I just saw it now. Yeah, this was for before when the plugins were happening. It was for me. It was Airwindows. It's just that I couldn't sell this stuff because it was incredibly, I was making these and I was keeping them closed source. I wasn't open source yet, but there was no chance that I was going to be able to sell them because you couldn't host them in an audio program. You had to run them separately as little separate programs. And then when you ran them as separate programs, what you would do is go, okay, select, and that would show you what, you'd load a particular, it was like antique computer age. You would hit scan, and it would go through whatever song you had. It's displaying 1 minute at a time, and it would just show you the graphic for the dynamics and stuff, all of the stuff that I had going on. And then when you hit process, it would go through and it would show you the graphics for the dynamics of the output, and it would be saving an output. So it's all batch processing, and you couldn't actually listen to any of it on the fly. You could not adjust things like left or right or gain or contrast or glue while listening to the output because it was purely batch processed and batch processed alone. You had to load up the output in another program to be able to listen to it. This is how primitive this stuff was. So I couldn't sell this. There were already DAWs at this time, and I had this going on. So I was learning how to alter sounds, but this was unsaleable. It was unusable. And it was also very slow going. Although I did actually, I mastered a album for Kenny Joya once, using this kind of technology. And that was kind of cool. It was reasonably successful as a mastering job, but I don't think I did very well by him. These days I could probably do better, but, I mastered a commercially released album, which I don't remember what it was now. It wasn't a enormous platinum smash, I know that. Using that kind of technology and just running the batch processing stuff and then listening back to what I had produced afterwards and then making little adjustments and having to batch process it all out again in order to hear what I did. So that's when these came from. These came out of a time that was very non-commercial, very primitive. And what I'm doing now is much more effective in many ways. But what I was doing then did have the GUI and stuff. So the guy that's saying oh, I could make GUI for you, you need to add the GUI that I make for you. Many people have offered this to me. And what they miss is that I've already designed stuff. And not only have I designed stuff that looks very Airwindowsy, that blends in very well with the system, the Mac OS 8 look. Like it blends in with the title bar and stuff. That's the title bar that we had on Mac OS 8 before OS X existed. And I can, that one even has tick marks. So you have a little bit of a frame of reference. All of those knobs have a specular highlight. You can see in the difference between, like, say, sheen and glue and focus, that the edge, the top edge of that knob, and also the bottom edge as around the side of it, is very slightly shaded to make it look as if it is lifted up. It's not just a circle, but it's a very chill, very subtle visual cue, indicating that it's something that can be touched and manipulated. And honestly, I think that stuff looks darn good. And there are ways which I could take a, say, paint something with watercolors to make a background image that looked interesting and good, and then overlay stuff like the moving circles and paint those on top of a section of that same appearance, so that it would have sort of best of both worlds, and that it would have the artistic watercolored appearance distinguishing one plugin from another, but then you'd also have the slight design of the knobs with the circles and the tick marks and the slight highlights and shadings and stuff. And those can be done on top of a existing graphic. Generally, if you can draw stuff on the screen, then it's also possible, whether you're using graphics primitives to do it, or something sophisticated like Photoshop, etc., or whether you're just doing it on a pixel-by-pixel basis and calculating everything out, it's possible to do that kind of stuff and combine the graphics with the knobs and things, and draw your display screen up at the top, which is what I would like to develop. I'd like to have a scrolling display screen, kind of like certain dynamics tracking plugins, metering plugins for mastering. I've seen some of those recently. And hey, T-Wath, as a matter of fact, I do. Just a moment. I don't know if this is a good time to look for the missing jack that fell on the floor, but I absolutely do. I'll be right back. Here I am, I'm back. I have mentioned before that I have done, and oh hey, we're in the last few minutes. Soon I'll get to go and make another cup of coffee and blow this clam bake. But I've mentioned that I have worked on a video game in the Godot engine, which is another open source project. Have I just run over the thing? Maybe I have. I'll find out in a moment. And as part of this game, which it's like a combination of a Twitch keyboard based game of just like fast reflexes and stuff. And it's a combination between that and Typing Tutor, because it's based on the idea of you're controlling large numbers of these little guys and you can only control one at a time. They look like little circles, and I'm probably going to keep it that way. And I did backgrounds, and the backgrounds look kind of like this. I think I can get some of this stuff off of the screen. So that's a watercolored background. And I held it over a strong light source and drew this, which is like shading, that exactly matches it if you flip it. So on the game, it shows this, which is a little watercolor image. And I've scanned it in so it looks prettier in the actual game. And then the shading behind it is a lighting effect in the actual gameplay, so that when the little things are moving around in this beige area, bouncing off of these obstacles, and the purpose for them is they need to go up off the top of the screen. And there's a gravity that it gradually increases as well. Look, here's another one. And in this case, it's the yellow areas that are obstacles. Also that little moon thing, you can bounce off of that. And again, there's a shading effect. And it helps define dark lines. And it also shades where light falls. So there's a shadowing effect. And then here's yet another one. And in this one, again, the earth tone area is where the characters can move around. They'll bounce off of that pole, and they bounce off of the shrubberies, these big, and then they got to go up into off the top of the screen, not the sides, just the top. So they have to funnel into a closer and tighter knit area, and the directions of these angles mean that stuff will tend to bounce back out again. So that's a difficult level. And here's another difficult level. In this case, that center part does not become an obstacle. But with things bouncing around and you can only control one at a time, it's harder to get them through this top area, these two spaces here. And again, with the shading, making a little shadowy effects. So yeah, I have done watercolors. So you could have a plugin where it's like, this is the diamond turning plugin, and the plugin looks like this, and those diamonds like rotate. They are the knobs. And I'd have to draw labels and things on there, but it's possible to do stuff like that. I'd be more than happy to teach people how to draw things in watercolor, because that's another fun thing to do. There is this is right way up, and you got to get up this top area. There's a sort of shading effect. Watercolors are fairly tricky stuff to play with, but here's yet another look. Sort of a pyramidal thing. This is not a very difficult level. Yeah. Got all the little watercolor paintings for the purpose of this game. So at some point, once we've gotten enough going on it, and it's downloadable, but I don't have built binaries yet. So you could go to the Airwindows GitHub, download this game as it stands, and build it in Godot. In fact, you're allowed to, because it's also open source. And me and my brother are finishing it up. The way that works is basically, what's happening with that is I'm building this game, and Dan's basically watching, because he is so trained and schooled as a programmer that he kind of is like everybody else is not worthy. And he didn't really see how I could think clearly enough to program anything. So one of the things that's happening is I am pursuing this game and developing it, and he's kind of sitting by and watching so that he can see how I think about things. And it's pretty cool in a lot of ways, because what happens is I think of stuff and do it. He is a very methodical thinker, but not as intuitive. So, I'll have like an idea here and here and here and here and here and here, and go in this direction and wind up with something coming out of the synthesis of the sporadic ideas I had. And Dan needs to start in one place and go step by step towards a defined goal. And what really throws him is that I'll be developing something like this and be like, okay, here is a screen, and you have to get the guy through the top. Except for then I'll be like, okay, wait, no. Now we try doing it upside down, and things have to fall down through the bottom. And now instead of having 2 guys, we have 527, and you have to something. And, this tends to lose my brother pretty bad, because when I'm chasing intuitive ideas like that, it can wildly go in all kinds of directions. But that's one of the cool things about it, is learning to pursue stuff and observe what's happening. It's like improvisation. It's like playing a guitar solo or being in a jazz ensemble that is taking off and going into improvisational things, or being the Grateful Dead, who are not a jazz ensemble but do exactly the same thing, in which it's like, are we in Ripple, or are we in China Cat Sunflower, or are we in space? To discover the answer to that question, listen. And it's like that. It's like doing software, developing a game, coming up with like some kind of screen or painting a watercolor thingy that follows certain rules. I'm doing certain things with the colors and such, but is also evolving towards a goal. Like, here is a deeply ugly but also very difficult level where the colors are kind of yucky, but at the same time, getting a set of moving pieces in which you can only control one of them at a time up through the top means that they're getting sidetracked and bounced down all the time, and it's very difficult to get stuff through to the goal. And yeah, it's not just about, and you'll hear this from me over and over again. I'll sign off with this. This is my final thought here. It's not just about getting the answer to doing a particular kind of thing, or showing up and being like, what microphone do I use for a snare drum, or anything like that. It's about being able to get into a situation with something that you're creating where you're listening to the thing you're creating as it's being created. See where it takes you. See where it goes. If, depending upon your goal, like if you're an EDM artist and you need to produce big room house, that's a very specific set of instructions. Like, you are not going to produce big room house without a kick drum. In fact, it's going to sound a particular way because that's part of what defines that genre as what it is. But if you're just, if rather than like, I'm going to make big room house, you're going, I'm going to make music, let's see where this takes me. That's a whole other story, and that's where things like big room house come from in the first place. And so that's what I endorse, is I endorse in all these different things, notably including the large amount of talk that I got into about animating, which I hope to be able to show people some of my ideas there at some point. First, get whatever tools are needed, otherwise you can't create anything. And then start exploring the thing that you're creating and see where it goes, because everybody's different. Everybody is going to go to a different place. And that's strongly colored by your limitations. Like if you are a painter and you don't have any hands, so you have to paint with a brush held in your teeth, that's going to color a painter. That's going to modify how you produce things, or even limit it. Or like, Django Reinhardt playing guitar with only a few fingers. You can take stuff like that, you can overachieve it to like, okay, since I'm Django Reinhardt, I'm going to play lots of notes because they're more hard to do. Or, because I was talking to a friend about deep house music and Larry Heard inventing it, and about how Larry Heard, a house music producer, started out as a progressive rock drummer. And he couldn't get his band to play his songs, so he was like, screw all this, and he went out and got some synthesizers and drum machines and started making an entirely different kind of music that was still colored by what he was able to do as a progressive rock drummer, as somebody who had some ideas regarding melody and harmony and stuff. And then you've got other people who were like, what if I just took a bass drum and made it be about 180 beats per minute and then distorted the hell out of it? And then you get gabber. And that's a crazy Dutch electronic genre, but somebody came up with that stuff, and it works for people who like that kind of thing, you know. But you gotta start exploring the space. You gotta start exploring, like, here I am, I'm making a thing, and what is this thing? Can I listen to the thing that I'm creating? Like my watercolors, these are the levels that I made, and as you can see, I made a whole bunch of them, and they all had to have colors on them, and they all had to have shapes with collision boxes. But then I tried to do as many variations on things as I could in order to see what would be good or not, or what would work or not. And in producing that particular game, and again, on the Airwindows GitHub, you could download it and build it in Godot. But I'm going to end up making downloadable binaries at some point when we develop it enough that I feel it's ready. But I was doing things like setting up these little screens where stuff bounces around, and you're supposed to go up, because that's the idea, is that you go up to the top, and you win by having all the little characters go up off the top of the screen. And for a while, I have gravity in a subtle way now, but for a while there I had no gravity, and then you just have large numbers of them, and it's like keeping track of them, and some of them will randomly be forced up and succeed, and then there's going to be other ones that are bouncing around randomly. You could have stuff bouncing up into here, and wasting some time that way. It would be a time limit on it. And it's like, okay, so I can do this. So what happens if I have 500 of the pieces? What do they do then? And the answer is they kind of go forced up to the top really fast. And then I could go through all of these and just say, okay, there's 500 pieces. How many seconds does it take for them all to randomly bounce to the top and be done? And that gave me a listing of how difficult each level was, because it showed you how much the game would play itself if you cranked it up, and how much would the game, like, I wonder whether I can find, oh yeah, here's a pretty decent example. Stuff like this is, on the other hand, super annoying, because if you have random stuff bouncing around in the bottom, all of these little sort of funnel shapes have stuff will tend to bounce out and back down again. And there's a very narrow path, like you go up to over here, you can't actually fit through here, and you don't go off the side. So this is a cul-de-sac. This does not get you a win. Instead, stuff just keeps bouncing around down here again. And if you're trying to go out this way, that's a sort of hairpin turn. So this was a harder level to do. But mostly I just drew it and I made the collision things for it. And then ran it and tested it and saw in experimentation, like, how hard is this if I fill the screen with 500 guys, how long does it take for them all to randomly bounce out the exit? And if the answer is a super long time, that becomes a harder level, because there's obviously a lot of stuff going on that makes it more difficult to get to the end quality. And it's like creating the thing and then watching it, experiencing it as it goes, finding out what it is, what it wants to be, and being able to develop that as things become more clear. So on that note, what I will do is say I hope that Airwindows is still up, because it was down for part of this stream. It's been nice catching up with you guys, and I will talk to you later. So bye-bye until next Monday, or next Sunday when I have another plugin coming out. And I'll do some kind of music thing on Tuesday at the same time, in the same place. Talk to you later.